Hi everyone, welcome to the October 15th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragonin. I'll be joined in just a second by my co-host Craig Milkowski. Breeders' Cup preps are pretty much done at this point. We do have a Grade 1 taking place at Keeneland on Saturday. Craig and I did a stakes preview of that on DRF's YouTube channel if you want to check that out. We're, though, going to shift our focus and talk about Belmont Park on Saturday, where they do have one graded stakes, kind of right in the smack dab in the middle of the card, the Grade 2 Sands Point, and it actually kicks off a pretty interesting late pick 5 sequence at Belmont. Not a ton of top-level racing, but I think it's a really intriguing sequence of races, some claiming maiden races later in the card, some big fields, especially towards the end of the sequence. So I think it's going to be interesting to discuss. Craig and I already did a video on the Sands Point that you can also check out on DRF's YouTube channel. We did a deep dive into that race, but we'll start off this pick 5 sequence by talking about it a little bit. And Craig, based on the comments and who I know you picked in the Sands Point, I think this might be a race where you try to narrow things down a little bit because it does look pretty competitive at first glance.
Yeah, it does. This is one where I do want to narrow it down, but not go crazy. It's not like I'm going to single anybody in here. It's a pretty tough race where you could go in a lot of directions, but I do think you, as you say, you got to have some opinion on a couple of these contenders because you don't want to use them all that are going to be low prices.
Yeah, the class horse coming into this Sands Point, which kicks off this late pick 5 sequence at Belmont in race 6. The pick 5 spans races 6 through 10. The likely favorite is the number 5, Higher Truth, and she's just got a resume of speed figures that point her out as the horse to beat in this race. She ran well throughout that Turf Triple Series at Belmont, never winning any of those races, but being right there at the finish of all of them. My issue with Higher Truth is that she's just gotten one perfect trip after another. She saved ground in these races. She's been up close to the pace when it's been slow, and she's still finished, but she's had all the best of it in those situations and hasn't quite been able to get the job done. This is a slight step down in class for her as she's not facing the likes of Santa Barbara and Shantasara, but still, she's going to have to work out a trip in this race because there's not a ton of speed on paper, and it's not like she's the quickest horse in the world in the early going.
No, one of my big concerns about her is the turn back in distance. She's a horse who's really seemed to thrive since they stretched her out to 1.25 miles. She had a brief turn back at Saratoga where she ran a decent second in that Saratoga Oaks Invitational. But otherwise, she just seems like a horse who wants more ground. I know we discussed it on both of our video previews. It's getting to that time of year where there's limited opportunities to run against straight 3-year-olds. And to me, it feels like that was more important in the decision here than the actual distance of the race. So while I think she can win, she's not a favorite that I'm rushing to the windows to bet, that's for sure.
Yeah, I went in a different direction, actually taking a different horse out of that Jockey Club Oaks where Higher Truth was second. I want the third place finisher from that race, Harajuku. The rail was the place to be on that opening weekend over the inner turf course at Belmont. They had just put the rails at 0 feet and they had that fresh ground down towards the hedge, and Higher Truth rode it the entire way and was also up on a slow pace, so that helped her quite a bit. Harajuku, she did ride the rail for a good portion of that race, but she kind of veered out at the start, which placed her at the back of the pack early, and that's not where you want to be when the pace gets really slow, especially in the middle portion of those races before they sprint for home. I thought that she did the best of any of the closers in there to get up for third. I think she can take a step forward here. I'm not that concerned about the slight turn back in distance to 9 furlongs as she now makes her first start off a trainer switch, 2 gram motion coming out of the very capable hands of Andre Fabre. But I just think Harajuku, that last race coupled with her really solid European form, makes her a major contender in here. And I'm just hoping there's enough pace on this turn back for her to make up the ground, because I do think just from a class standpoint, she might be the best horse in this race.
Yeah, I have no problem with her. I'm certainly going to use her prominently on my pick 5 tickets. You pretty much covered it, so not a whole lot to add on that one. Another horse that I'm also going to use, and the one I settled on as my top pick on our video preview, is the 2-horse Jordan's Leo. She's a horse who it just looks like a new horse to me on turf. She had some pretty good dirt form, but she won a really nice allowance race at Saratoga, sitting just off a fast pace. I thought she ran really well at pretty big odds in the Pebble Stakes, where she sat just off and finished a good second, beating another horse in here, Runaway Rumor, who is entered in this field. And I just have a feeling that the pace isn't going to be very strong. I know that's no surprise for a turf race at Naira. And whether she's on the lead or just off it. You also have our flash drive who might show a little piece. I just don't think there's going to be a lot, and I liked her finishing kick and think she's got a chance at a price.
Yeah, I have no problem with that pick. I do think you generally want horses that are going to be somewhat forward in this race, unless you think a horse like Harajuku just has that class edge to overcome the pace, which is what I'm hoping. But the two horses that I do think are going to work out the best trips close to the pace are those two you mentioned from the Pebbles, Jordan's Leo and our Flash Drive. You actually have 4 horses coming out of the Pebbles that are coming back in this Sands Point. But like you, I want the ones that are going to be forwardly placed. Jordan's Leo makes a ton of sense. I think you covered her well. And our Flash Drive, she'll be a bigger price, stuck all the way on the outside. But I think they're going to revert to a more aggressive style with her because she was pretty successful racing close to the pace 2 and 3 back up at Woodbine. And she just seems like a horse that's really come back as a 3-year-old in improved form. And I'm not sure she was necessarily helped by breaking slowly last time, which forced her to come from off the pace. I think that she's going to be much more forward in here from an outside post position. And, if I was going to get a little more creative, I might have put her on top because I do think of the horses we're talking about, she might offer the best value of all. She could be in the double-digit odds range, but she's one in a pick 5 sequence I would definitely use as a backup because she could really inject some value into this if she gets home in the first leg.
Yeah, I'm definitely using her as well. She certainly had no business being back in last in that last start behind that slow pace. I know she didn't break well, but I'm putting a line through that race. I think she's a much better filly than we saw. The one horse at a lower price that I'm not going to use at all is the 7-horse Fluffy Socks. She's a horse who, to me, had her big chance when she shipped out west to the Del Mar Oaks. In my opinion, a much weaker field than what she's going to see here. Going Global has kind of dominated that division, so no knocks on her, but she couldn't even get second in that race, and we've talked about it many times. I don't think that West Coast turf division is very strong, regardless of age or sex. They're all a cup below, in my opinion. So she's the 7-2 or 7-2 third choice on the morning line, and I don't want any parts of her here.
Yeah, we're on the same page about Fluffy Socks, as you know. She has improved recently for Chad Brown, but I feel like the fact that she's going out for that barn is going to be built into the price a little bit. So she's probably going to be a slight underlay based on her form. I wasn't thrilled with her last effort from the Del Mar Oaks. She ran fine. I just think that this is not exactly class relief, even though she's coming out of a grade 1 race into a grade 2. So I preferred others at bigger prices like you. Let's move on in the sequence to some races that Craig and I have not discussed together yet, so maybe I can be a little surprised by some of his picks. Let's move on to race 7, the second leg of this pick 5 sequence. And I should mention off the bat, as we go into this second leg, it's a $30,000 claimer, non-winners of 2, lifetime going 6.5 furlongs, that the number 7 Road to Success is almost certain to scratch out of this race because I just finished the morning lines for Sunday, and he's actually entered back in a similar spot, but going a route distance on Sunday's card. So based on the rules, I think he almost has to scratch out of this Saturday race. So likely to not have him participating as one of the possible short prices. And I think that's just going to make the number 6, Cousin Andrew, a clear-cut favorite in this race. But Craig, I don't totally trust this horse. He's coming out of the Chad Brown barn, and while he ran fine first off the claim for Peter Walder last time, and he's getting a little bit of class relief, moving down the claiming ladder a little bit, I just wonder if he's going to continue to hold his form for this new barn.
Yeah, it is kind of hard to say. I mean, it's not like he's moved into a bad barn. Peter Walder certainly wins, but at these lower level claiming races, it's always hard for me to have a lot of faith. I mean, I'm going to use Cousin Andrew because I certainly think he can win this race. It wasn't the worst race we're going to see. I mean, he tracked a really fast pace that day, and it's actually been a pretty productive race. The second place finisher came back to run well. The third place finisher has come back to win a race, and both with better speed figures. So I don't want to knock it too much, and I'm certainly going to use him, but I don't think he's a horse I would want to rely on as a single.
Yeah, I have a feeling we're going to land in the same spot here. I really like the number 2 Hoopla in this race. Looking at the TimeformUS pace projector, this is a situation favoring horses on or near the lead, so I want somebody that can have some early position in this race, and I think Hoopla fits the bill. I don't know why they've run this horse on turf twice in his 4 starts. It's not like he has a ton of turf pedigree, and his dirt races are so much better than his turf efforts. He ran well to win when he broke his maiden at Saratoga 3 back, albeit against a weaker field, but he came back in his race first off the claim for Bruce Brown, first time against winners, 2 back at Belmont. And while he was 7th, beaten almost 7 lengths, I don't think he ran quite as badly as that result indicates, because that pace was honest. The winner came from out of the clouds. And also September 18th at Belmont was a day that the rail was really the place to be on the main track. The winner rode the rail the entire way. I think the 3rd, 4th, and 5th place finishers all rode the rail. And Hoopla broke from the outside post, was never inside, and I thought ran a decent race to be in contention until the top of the stretch that day. So hoping this apprentice just gets aggressive, sends him to the front, and doesn't look back, because I think Hoopla is a major contender in this race, and he probably won't be favored.
Yeah, that he's going to be my top pick as well in here for a lot of the reasons you said. The one slight concern I have is the 4-horse in here, American Gentleman, who I don't think is really a contender in this race. He's a horse who probably doesn't want any parts of 6.5, but I suspect he's going to go. But there's no reason to think Hoopla can't just sit off of him if that does in fact happen. If Hoopla outbreaks him, great, he'll make the lead and be fine. If not, he's run okay from just off the pace before. Actually, he hasn't. He's never really shown that, but I'm not convinced he can't do that in a field like this. This is definitely a big drop down in class. He tracked off of American Gentleman last time in that race you were talking about. Didn't have a lot left, but I do think he had some excuses. So he's going to be my top pick as well. I was prepared to give all the reasons I didn't like Road to Success in here, but I guess that's pretty pointless since he's not going to run now. So in this race, I'm going to be relying on Hoopla and a little lesser on Cousin Andrew.
Yeah, we're pretty much on the same page there. And I don't think that other speed horse American Gentleman is totally impossible. I just agree with you. I thought Hoopla ran better in that September 18th race because American Gentleman had that inside position that you wanted, and he didn't really go on at the end of that race. But, he might be in front here, and they might not be going that fast up front. So I think he's one that could possibly get in the mix at a big price. I just think he's more likely to complete a minor award, whereas I think Hoopla is a major win contender. Move on to race 8, a pretty competitive claiming race, 30,000 non-winners of 2 lifetime, going 1 mile and a 16th on the turf course. And I say it's competitive, Craig, because there is a horse that I think is going to be favored in this race in the number 7 Gabby Squared, who I've just never been a big fan of. She's kind of a plotter, doesn't really have any early speed, but she's going out for the Chad Brown barn. She's coming off a victory in a race where it seems like a lot of the others have that sort of proven loser profile, and I feel like she's just going to take a lot of money because of the connections and the fact that she's coming off that victory, and I'm just not sure that she's really that good.
Yeah, this is a race. My first note is I'm going to try to beat the favorite. She doesn't have any real edge on this field as far as speed figures go, and she's going to be against the pace more than likely. She's a plotter, as you say. There's not a lot of speed signed on. Now, it's not a race that I was able to narrow down to 1 or 2 horses, because after her, I do think it becomes wide open, but I'm not going to use her. I mean, if you're going to spread in the race, there's no point using a horse who's probably going to be 8-5 in a big field.
Yeah, and I do think it's important to note that you have a horse on the also eligible list, the number 11, Summer in the City, who some might consider a major contender if she does draw into this race, and she only needs 1 scratch to get in. So be aware of that at scratch time if she gets in here, because that might change around your wager a little bit. Personally, I don't love the form of Summer in the City. She is dropping a little bit in class, but she's been favored a number of times recently, and just looks like her form is heading in the wrong direction. Even when she was running some of her better speed figures going back to Gulfstream a couple of years ago, I think that form is a little bit suspect. So I don't like Summer in the City, and I kind of hope she draws into this race because she'd improve the price on some other horses that I am interested in. So I'd be against both of these favorites if they happen to participate. I think that there's a major contender in this race that is likely to get a much more favorable trip than the number 7 Gabby Squared, Craig, and that's the number 6 Freedom Machine. I know she's going out for some low profile connections, Rick Schosberg, but I just like this filly's recent form. She's been competing in some tougher New York bred nominators of 1 allowance races, and I thought she got some difficult trips at Saratoga. She was wide a few times, 2 and 3 back, not ideal journeys, and last time I thought that she ran reasonably well. She was again a little bit wide throughout, but she made a good move to challenge for the lead in mid-stretch and just got run down in a race that kind of was falling apart at the end. So with the rider switch to Luis Saez, I think she's going to get the right kind of aggressive ride in here, and I just think in some ways, Frida Machine might be the most likely winner, and I don't think she's going to be favored in this race.
No, I have her as an A horse for sure. Part of that because she's shown on front in the pace projector in a race without any pace. I can't guarantee it. I mean, you look at her PP, she doesn't look like a front runner. She's never even sniffed the lead early in a race, but she has shown more improved early speed as of late. She was sitting second early last time, a couple lengths back, and there's just not a lot of other speed in here. She doesn't have to go to the front, but it's hard to envision a scenario where she's not in the top three at the very worst, and the pace is going to be pretty slow. She has speed figures right there with the morning line favorite, a little better actually than she has run. So she's a big contender for me as well.
There are so many ways you can go in this race. Where else would you land? Because I think there are some horses that are trying new things, either dropping in for the tag the first time, stretching out in distance that you can look at. I've got a horse that's double-digit odds in the morning line that I think I'm a little interested in, but who else would you be looking at, Craig?
I'm wondering if it's another one, the same one that I'm interested in. It's the 3-horse Creative Legacy. She's a filly who hasn't been on the turf in a while. She started out her career on the turf without a lot of success, but that kind of points to the intention to me that they thought she was a turf horse all along. Her last turf start was at the fairgrounds back in January when she was just a very newly turned 4-year-old. And she actually ran a really good second that day with an 84 speed figure. The top horses in here we're talking about have run in the low 90s, so that certainly isn't out of the realm of possibility for a horse who's a year older, basically, than what we saw then. So she is the one big price horse that I'm going to have on my ticket.
Yeah, we're looking at the exact same horse. I don't think that she's necessarily nearly as likely to win as the number 6 Freedom Machine, but she's going to be a much better price. And for all the reasons you mentioned, I think that she's a contender and she's a possible player in this race. She's got some tactical speed, and I don't think she's going to be that far off the pace in that slow pace situation. And furthermore, she does have a little bit of sneaky turf pedigree, and it seems like maybe she got into better form just overall after they tried turf very early in her career. And also, don't hold her last race against her too much, because that was another day when the rail was a significant was the place to be on the main track at Belmont, and she was just out in the 6 or 7 path for almost her entire trip. So I would not be too hard on her for that last race and think she's likely to run better second off this trainer switch to Gustavo Rodriguez. One other horse that I don't want to go without mentioning, Craig, is the number 4 Cherokee Song. I know she's not a winning type, and she goes out for a trainer that almost never wins on the turf and doesn't win just in general much on the NYRA circuit, but Cherokee Song has too many speed figures against better company to just ignore in this race. I know she's being ridden by Mike Luzzy, who doesn't win that often, especially on the turf either, but I just think that the class relief is meaningful for Cherokee Song, and I would not want to leave her out of this race because she could be somewhere in the 10-1 range, and her form suggests that she's got a better chance of winning than that.
Yeah, I agree. She's another one that's on the list of horses I'm going to use. I mean, all you have to do is look back to her maiden claiming win back at Aqueduct in April, where she won a maiden claimer 40,000 with a 92 speed figure. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it's basically exactly what Gabby Squared did the last time out when she broke her maiden at Monmouth. And as you said, she's likely to be the favorite. Now, her form's obviously a bit muddled since then because she's been running against much better horses. She ran on the dirt one time, but she's definitely taken a drop in class, and there's no reason to think she hasn't held her form because since then, other than that last race in the good track at Saratoga on the dirt, where she did no running at all, she's run a string of 90-type speed figures, so I certainly give her a chance in here as well.
Let's move on to race 9, the penultimate leg of this sequence. And things don't get much easier as we proceed on to the last 2 legs of this pick 5 sequence. I think these might be the 2 toughest races that we're going to talk about, race 9 and 10. The 9th is a nominators of 1 allowance race for the New York bred fillies and mares going 6.5 furlongs on the dirt. And the one thing I know about this race, Craig, is that I want to take a stand against this morning line favorite, Quantitative Reason. I know she comes in off that blowout victory at Belmont last time, but like I keep harping on, that opening weekend at Belmont, especially September 19th, was a day that we saw a significant rail bias, and she just crossed right over from her outside post to get to the rail that day, rode it to victory. I think that 8-length margin is significantly exaggerated by the track bias, and it's not like her prior form makes her some major standout in this race. She's definitely a contender, but at the likely short price, I want to look at some alternatives.
Yeah, once again, we're kind of on the same page here. This is a race where the pace projector doesn't show a lot of speed. The 1 and 2 are both shown up on the front, the 4 sitting just off of them. And of those two speeds, I much prefer the horse just to her outside. I'm not sure what happened last time where she didn't break well, but I'd be really surprised if she didn't get right back to those front running type tactics. Now, I'll be honest, I don't particularly love her either, but I'm going to use her before I use the 1 for sure. And that's how I landed on the horse just to their outside, the 4 Cinderella's Cause. It's shown tracking them on the pace projector. Seems like she's going to get a perfect trip in here. I am a little bit leery that she won a pretty easy off the turf race last time. But after showing no ability whatsoever on the turf in her first 2 races, she showed maybe dirt's her surface. Her 87 speed figure is just 3 points off of that the morning line favorite won while riding a track bias to that 8-length win. So I much prefer her to the favorite and even a little bit to the 2 Esotica.
Yeah, Cinderella's Cause is a horse that I really didn't know what to do with in this race. I felt a little silly not using her on the dirt last time in retrospect because she's a horse that I kind of liked a bit in her debut. I thought she had a really nice sales work as a 2-year-old, and I thought she had some talent. I just kind of trusted her connections and thinking she was a turf horse, but turns out she's much better on the dirt. I do wonder a little bit about the quality of that race, as you were kind of alluding to. It was an off-the-turf race. There really weren't a whole lot of dirt horses with prior form to make that race a legitimate dirt event. The runner-up in there, Madame Rose, if you look up her PPs, she's one of those Ophir maidens who is really more of a $25,000 maiden claimer, often even overmatched at the $25,000 level. So I question the form of that race a little bit, but I mean, look, she ran the speed figure that she ran, and as far as non-winners of one allowance races go, it's not like this is the toughest one you're going to come across. I mean, most of the horses in this race are stepping up out of claiming races. So I think that she's definitely one that you can consider. I did veer more in the direction of that number 2, Esotica. I just kind of trust the connections a little bit more, Mike Maker and Luis Saez. I do think that she had a valid excuse last time. She was off about a length slowly in that allowance race, and that was a much tougher allowance race at this same level. Beautiful Karen out first, pretty clever. They're just better than the horses that she's facing in here. And I don't really want to fault her because while she was inside early, she did move out to the center of the track at about the 5/16 pole, and that's not where you wanted to be on September 18th. So I do think that Esotica is going to run a lot better in here, and if she gets back to that speed figure 2 back, as you were alluding to, I think that she's going to be pretty tough for this field to beat. But there are some others you can consider. I mean, if I'm going to look at one of those horses that, has raced in claiming races in the past and has some dirtied up form, I might take a look at the number 8, Mosienko. She goes out for Dennis Lallman, a barn that can be a little bit sneaky at times, and she does have back races on the dirt that make her formidable in here. I mean, particularly 3-back when she was third by a neck in that $25,000 claimer against Open Company. I think that race puts her right in the mix today, and she's run poorly in 2 starts since then, since the trainer changed, but I wouldn't be surprised if she gets back on track here facing a slightly easier field.
Yeah, I can't knock anybody for making a case for some other horses in here. For me, I'm going to spread pretty wide in the previous race we talked about, so I'm going to stick to the 2 and 4, Esotica and Cinderella's Cause, and hope to get through, but no argument against them. The Lallman barn has certainly done some surprises in the past, and this one wouldn't shock me. But for me, at least personally, I can't spread in every race. I try to keep the ticket manageable, so this is one of those where I'm narrowing it down to just 2.
Yeah, it's a hard race because I don't really want it to be a spread race. It's just I have such low confidence in the horses that I put on top in this race, like the 2 and the 8, that I feel like there are some wacky things that could happen. I mean, who's going to be shocked if a horse like Happy Sophia wins again? I know it's unlikely that Randy Persaud's going to win 2 races in a row, but there's nothing wrong with her race from last time. She ran a competitive speed figure, even though it was against weaker, and even a horse like Raffinity for low-profile connections. I mean, she's got some back races that put her in the mix. So there are a lot of ways to go in this race, so I really wouldn't be surprised by anybody winning. I mean, even the longest shot on the board, Stormy Cat Lady, has some things to recommend. So just kind of a difficult race in this sequence because you could go thin or you could really use all of them. It's just a tough one to get through. And it doesn't get much easier, Craig, as we move on to this last leg. $40,000 maiden claimer for the New York bred fillies and mares, going 7 furlongs on the Widener turf course. I do think that there are some favorites in this race that, I'd be afraid to take a big stand against, like the number 7 Escape with Friends, the number 8 New York Dancer, and even the number 11 to a lesser extent Phenomenal Woman. But it's not like I have that much trust in any of them. They just do have some of the best form. But this is a pretty competitive event, and I think you can make some cases for bigger prices as well.
It is. This is a race where I'm just not sure what direction to go. It's one where I wish we could see the board before we bet, but obviously that's not an option in the last leg of the pick 5. And it's just the typical closing race of that leg where it looks pretty wide open on paper. And I'll start with a couple of the horses you mentioned. I think you have to use the 11 Phenomenal Woman just because it's Christophe Clement, and this is a specialty of his. He's really good at these turf sprints. He gets Dylan Davis on board, who's proven he can ride these. And though she didn't take a lot of money first time out at Gulfstream, I thought she ran decent enough, and it looks like a good spot for her. First time off that long layoff, second time out. New York Dancer, same thing. I don't have as much confidence in this one as I would in the 11 horse. She's a horse who didn't do a whole lot of running at the same class level, but she is second time out, so maybe she could improve some. She ran an okay speed figure, but that's kind of the dilemma of this race. They've all run kind of the same speed figures, regardless of price. So for me, I'm going to lean most heavily on the 11 horse in here, just because she's more of an unknown quantity than some of these others.
Yeah, I thought of the shorter prices that the number 11 Phenomenal Woman was the one that I wanted to be most against in this race. I know that seems like a big drop in class from the Open Maiden at Gulfstream down to the Maiden claiming New York bred at Belmont, but I don't know if this is that big of a drop in class. She didn't get a particularly strong speed figure for that race at Gulfstream. Not really how strong of a field that was that she was facing first time out. And I went back and watched that race. She got a decent trip. She just didn't do any running. I'm just not sure that she's really that good. So I wanted to go in a different direction. I mean, I do think that there are some reasons to give an excuse to horses like Escape with Friends and New York Dancer last time. I mean, New York Dancer obviously was just making her debut in that race. And if you watch the start, she was taken up pretty significantly, and that's why she was so far back in the early going. Escape with Friends, she's just kind of sluggish out of the gate typically, and it's not unusual to see her that far back, but she really kind of lost contact with the field last time. You don't like to see that with a horse that is a deep closer. You want to see them at least, make their way into the race at about the halfway point, and she just left Jose Lascano with way too much ground to make up. So Escape with Friends, she's got prior races that make her a major contender in this race. You just kind of wonder if she's going to have her head in the game on Saturday. So I do think New York Dancer is maybe the more likely of the two to step forward. I kind of preferred her, but I think there are some other fuzzies in this race that you can make a bit of a case for. The one that I'm most interested in is the number 3, the other New York horse, New York Banker. She tried the turf one time before back in April at Belmont and didn't do very well that day, but that was a day when, the turf course is listed as firm, but that course had taken a significant amount of rain. You see it's in the TimeformUS PPs. It's a firm turf course with a 5 track condition rating, which is typically the rating you see when the turf course is yielding. And the track had taken a lot of rain opening weekend, and for whatever reason, they just mislabeled the course as being firm when it clearly wasn't. And she just didn't seem to handle it at all, backed up after setting the pace. They gave her some time off since then, and she has returned as just a completely different horse during the summer. She ran 2 races on the dirt, set a very fast-paced 2 back before fading in an effort that was a lot better than it seems. And then last time at Saratoga, she was off a little bit slowly, rushed up to chase Esotica, who we just talked about in the prior race. That one kind of ran off the screen, but I thought New York Banker chased her pretty gamely last time. Now she's getting back on the turf, and I'm not opposed to the surface switch. She's got a little bit of turf pedigree on the bottom side. The Dam won twice on the turf. The Dam's a half-sister to some horses that handled it well. She's by Central Banker, pretty versatile sire. And Mike Maselli is an underrated trainer that does a good job. So, she's going to be the speed in this race, or at least she's supposed to be. And I think she deserves another chance on this surface based on everything that I just went over, based on the prior time that she ran over it. So she'll be a price, and I put her on top.
Well, you've won me over with that. I actually had her on my list as a horse I would use at a price as the only one, really. But you sold me. I had overlooked that 5 on the firm designation. And that's a really good point you make, because most of the time that designation we give is going to be pretty close to what the official track designation is. But in this case, it really jumped too. As you mentioned, the 5 is not even a good course. It's definitely more yielding and getting even close to soft, which would be the 2-3 range. So that's a race you can throw out. I think I do like that she showed some speed that day, and she's a horse that's definitely worth using. I did want to circle back to that 11 horse Phenomenal Woman, since you mentioned that race. While you were talking, I pulled up the chart again because I was thinking maybe I missed it, and there's a really strong case to be made that I underrated that race. Nearly every single horse that came back on turf improved their speed figure by in the 10-point range. So if anything, that makes me even more bullish on her. I think she's going to run pretty well in this spot, but I do like your top pick. It's a race where I'm going to use probably 3 or 4 horses. New York Banker will be one, and Phenomenal Woman will definitely be another one.
No, you make a good point about that Phenomenal Woman race. It might be a stronger field than it seems. It's hard to kind of get those speed figures right sometimes when you've got so many lightly raced horses in there. You kind of have to see how they run afterwards. And, that might be one that's a stronger race than it appeared at the time. I remember that they entered this horse back in, I think, April at Aqueduct, in a similar spot. And then she has disappeared for basically 6 months. And now she's surfacing here. I just am getting uncertain vibes from this horse, but maybe she's a contender. I just preferred some others in here. I mean, I would also want to use horses as backups, like the number 4, Love's Misery. I think that she's going to really appreciate the turn back in distance. 7 furlongs might be just perfect for her because she showed improved tactical speed going longer. I just don't think she's got the stamina to handle those 2-turn races like she faced at Saratoga last time and 2 back. And, even a horse like the number 6, Incontrovertible, is somewhat sneaky in here for Ned Allard, who brings some live runners to New York at times. She didn't face a bad field at all with Pimlico in her one prior turf try, and now she's turning back a little bit. So I do think there are a lot of ways to go in this finale, and it's one where I would want to spread a little bit.
I would say it's interesting, and I think you make a good point. The horses you're kind of leaning to are the ones who are turning back and have showed 7 furlongs is probably within their scope. There's a few in here are coming out of the shorter 5.5 and 6 furlong turf races, and I agree. I don't like those horses at all when we stretch out the 7. So just thought that was a point worth making, that neither one of us kind of care for those horses stretching out, because to me the 7 furlongs are almost like routes.
So as far as ticket construction go, I didn't put one together in Ticketmaker this week, but I do kind of have a mental picture of how I want to play this sequence. I mean, in the first leg, the Sands Point, I would try to narrow it down a little bit like we were talking about. It's the kind of race where I would make Harajuku the only A, and I would use some backups like Craig's Selection, the 2, as well as our Flash Drive, and I would kind of have to decide based on my opinions in the other legs if I want to even use a horse like Higher Truth, because she's going to be a short price. You don't want to use the short price favorite defensively, as I do air quotes, but she is a horse that can definitely win the race. And if I do like some long shots later on, as I've kind of alluded to, maybe I want to have a backup ticket that starts with her and also uses those long shots, but I'd have to see how I can construct that, because you don't want to be using a sequence that's just all favorites starting off with Higher Truth. I would narrow down that 7th race quite a bit. I like Hoopla. I would use Cousin Andrew as a backup, and maybe even Litterbox as a distant backup, but I do want to have most of my play go through Hoopla. That 8th race, I would again lean kind of heavily on Frida Machine with the backups like Cherokee Song and the number 3, Creative Legacy, who Craig also mentioned. And then I would try to spread a little bit more in the last 2 legs. Esotica is the one that I would lean on most heavily, but I'd want to have a lot of coverage in there, highlighting horses like Mosienko, like Cinderella's Cause, who Craig also mentioned. And then the last leg, I would spread quite a bit. I made New York Banker, I should say, the number 3, my top pick, but she's not one that I have a ton of confidence in. I just think she's a good value play in that race. I would also use some of the favorites, the horses that Craig mentioned, and some of those fringe players that I was mentioning at the end of our rundown of that race.
Yeah, this is a race where, this sequence is one where I'm definitely going to dive into that ticket maker, because I spent way too much time on this not to put a ticket in. I'm definitely going to play it, so I'm going to use it because I think it's one where it's going to be really helpful. As you said, you don't want to put tickets in where you have 3 and 4 favorites in and or just hoping to get lucky in one race, because I don't think there's any huge bombs that we landed on. Maybe one or two $20-$25 horses that could make the ticket worthwhile. But it's one where I like that the ticket maker can kind of sort out and you can rate the horses. And I don't want tickets with, a couple favorites we don't particularly like. As you mentioned, the horse in the Sands Point, and also that in the 9th race, the one horse who we're both tossing out. So for me, I'm going to I'm not going to use the favorites in those races and spread a little bit and then hope our opinions work out in the other 3. I try to keep my pick 5 tickets under under $100 because, once you get over that, I think you're probably putting in a lot of bad tickets. So, and I don't want to spend more than that hoping to hit big. So that's how I'm going to play it. I'll try to put out my ticket maker sequence out on the Twitter as I did last time. It didn't work out very well as I missed the first leg, but the other legs turned out all right. So we'll do the same thing for this one.
Well, that's it for this week's TimeformUS Forecast. Hopefully, Craig and I have some luck with those tickets that we were just outlining for this Belmont Pick 5 sequence. But, there's some other good racing happening around the country this week, including that Grade 1 at Keeneland that we were just talking about at the beginning of this podcast. We'll recap all of that when we come back for the TimeformUS Pacecast next week. We'll look at some of the top speed figures, and maybe there'll be some interesting 2-year-olds that have come out of the woodwork at this time of year that are also worth highlighting. So we'll talk about all of that on the Pacecast on Tuesday next week. Remember that you can always listen to these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcasts, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS Pacecast coming up on Tuesday.